micro. This is your view. Um, I'm semi-successful, um, apparently. Excellence is still in the center. Experimentation, so a realist ontology, if you will, is still at the heart of what you see as science. Um, Curiosity, drivenness, facts, pursuit of excellence, knowledge, empiricism is still there. So when I looked at this picture, I thought I'm less successful than I was previously, because I have a little bit more work to do to dig deeper in challenging the what I called the accepted worldview of what science is. And this is shown in this chart as well. Science is a political ideology and should be addressed as such. I said, and a minority, not a big minority, but the minority has, or the difference wasn't big, but the minority was in agreement with it, that the history that I've been painting and its politics and policies prove that it's a political ideology. A little bit more people agreed, or a little bit higher was the agreement with a um, either or version, which is typical of the social sciences, of course. It's partially true. Science is about truth still, but it is often exploited for political ends. And still, the majority or the strongest agreement was still with saying that science is a tool to describe reality that's out there, and imperfections, if this description, are not political but are stemming from the different methods. So this is all okay, but I think we're getting there. And by the end of the course, I hope this will change. So keep in mind this picture. It's recorded. It's in the presentation. It will be in a PDF, so it won't go away. And we will return to this question by the end of next week. So if I would forget, then please remind me to do it again and see where we're headed. Okay, so recap. We spoke about the 17th century, war of beliefs, and the emergence of the scientific revolution. We spoke about the early 20th century, another war, how the scientific worldview and the scientific revolution was turned into a policy revolution in science. And then we also spoke about the 60s, where this policy, mainly of fear of a centralized communist socialist system and the infiltration of the Soviet Union and its ideology into science, was or turned policy into a fight for independence. And this was kind of the trajectory we went through. So we said that science policy is about economic productivity and efficiency and neoliberalism. Its politics is post-Keynesian liberalism with a self-governing authoritarian republic, as Polanyi has described in its vision. Material progress and open sky brings about a realist, universalist progress. So today, on this meso level that I promised, I would want to show you some of the critical tradition that emerged partly in the 19th century, but mostly in parallel to this policy revolution, all of which had a very serious impact on the emergence, I think, of responsible research and innovation. So to see and understand the full picture of what we're talking about, it's not enough to understand the evolution of the political ideology that is science. But we also have to reflect on the criticism of this political ideology, especially by those thinkers who actually took implicitly or explicitly science, both social and natural, science as actually being a political ideology and critiquing or criticizing it from this perspective. So let's see some of these critical tradition. Obviously, the most well-known, won't surprise you, is the critical tradition of Marxism and post-structuralism. Marx, who obviously claimed that social phenomena are material in nature, and this applies to history. Societies in their cultural and institutional superstructure, that is, society, naturally move from stage to stage, and the driver of this is the dominant class and its displacement, and how new fights and clashes between classes drive history forward, and drive also social and political upheaval. The importance of Marx is that he introduced critical tradition itself and suggested that the social, or the reflection on the social as a scientific endeavor, might be attuned towards not only describing reality as is, but also towards change. And change, of course, is a political phenomenon. And we all know the 11th thesis of the Feuerbach theses, saying that up until then, up until now, he wrote, the role of the philosopher was to describe reality. From now on, the role of the philosopher should be to change reality. And I think this was the moment when, for the first time, science was properly, in my understanding, treated as a political ideology. And within the framework of such political ideology, it was not only the role of the scientist and science to describe reality out there, but also understood that this reality, in Marx's time, still out there, can be, should be, maybe changed. So the scientific tradition also inscribes its description into reality. George Lukács, in the early 20th century, one of the preeminent Western Marxists, as he's called, his theory revolved around reification as a process which affects social relations. And he named 4 of these, that objects are socially created, primarily as features of them being commodities. This is similar to relations between persons, and also their subjectification or subjectivities, the relations to themselves, which is obviously alienation. And finally, that this impacts the relation between individuals and society at large. Again, we see that what traditional science saw as objects and as subjects, or the natural as opposed to the social, are interconnected and interlinked in multiple forms and multiple ways. And reification, the process of objectification in the sense of creating objects from what traditionally are called subjects, is also something that the social sciences can reflect upon. Obviously, this is not surprising that this is the time in the 20s and 30s of the last century that traditional natural science phenomena, physics, Newtonian physics, is also questioned, both by Einsteinian theory of relativism or relativity, but also this is the time when quantum theory and quantum mechanics enters the sphere of the natural sciences, which also questions the understanding of natural reality as it was imagined by Newton and previous physicists from the scientific revolution's natural science tradition. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Michel Foucault has argued that when looking at societies at large, knowledge and power are intimately related, in as much as he calls this phenomena power knowledge. That points to the fact that the exercise of power actually depends on a scaffold of knowledge that supports it.
आपका circle network बहुत अच्छा है.
Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. And he claims that knowledge advances in the interest of power of certain groups, and this in change marginalizes other groups. He obviously looked first at mental health and realized that mental health is a very fluid concept, and when institutionalized by the power knowledge of madhouses, this creates not only the mad person, but also the non-mad person, that is the healthy one. And madness is intimately intertwined with certain moral perceptions of the social. He continued his research into prisons and into sexuality and sexual traditions, understanding that phenomena that we think are given are actually socially constructed by power knowledge. So kind of this sums up, and I'll get to Chantal Mouffe in a minute. This kind of sums up, and obviously I'm just cherry picking some of the most important theorists of the late 19th and early and mid 20th century in the Marxist and post-structuralist tradition, all of which understood that under the conditions of what then was the social sciences, reflection is permissible, that what we take as social reality is not something that is given, but is politically constructed. And it is politically constructed in multiple ways. Marx thought that it is politically constructed by class struggle and the division between superstructure and understructure. Lukács focused on reification, objectification of the social, and Foucault focused on knowledge that is intimately related with power, and such knowledge or power knowledge then creates the social as much as it represents. And to round off the post-structuralist thought, Chantal Mouffe, French political scientist, introduced the concept of agonistic democracy, understanding that democratic processes, if you will, political processes, should not be aiming for what traditionally is understood as compromise or consensus, that is an equilibrium, because conflict in political life is inevitable, and it is impossible to identify final, rational, and neutral decision processes because of the ubiquity of power and the plurality of values out there in the social. In understanding the social, what MUF suggests is giving up what we colloquially would call an objective understanding of reality, in which if we use the appropriate tools, if we use the appropriate methods to understand the social or the political, we will arrive easily at final, rational, and neutral decision processes that will adequately describe the objective realities of the social. So all of these traditions kind of question the reality as is out there and suggest that this reality, especially that of social reality, is as much constructed by our reflections on it and our influence that is animated by our power positions, class or other, and by the knowledge we have or develop through these reflections. So this is kind of one of the important elements of questioning the nature, social, the objective, subjective dichotomies of what traditional science has been developing and living and working with. This happened parallel to the second half of the 20th century, when a new area of study that's called science, society, and technology studies have emerged, partly actually as an endeavor of Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend, both of whom started out as physicists, and this is a nice little trick on my interpretation that policy was mainly in the 20th century done by natural scientists who were either chemists or physicists and understood the world stemming from the worldview of physics and chemistry. Thomas Kuhn, famously in the early 60s, has argued that science is not one thing, and therefore science and scientific methods are not a simple linear accumulation of new knowledge describing adequately the reality out there. And this applies not only to the social sciences, but it equally applies to the natural sciences. But science undergoes periodic revolutions, as he called them, and these revolutions he called paradigm shifts, in which the nature of scientific inquiry within a particular field is abruptly and radically transformed. Thomas Kuhn, in his famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, has argued that there are two types of science, if you will: normal science, which is an accumulation of knowledge within one specific paradigm, and scientific revolutions, in which there is a paradigm change, and this paradigm change changes everything in the reality, or at least in the epistemology of that reality, so the knowledge that we can develop of that reality. This is relevant because, and obviously made Thomas Kuhn, who was a physicist, extremely famous, that even if there's a lot of criticism of whether there is or there was scientific revolutions. And as I described, I used the term scientific revolution, of course, for the 17th century, but also described it as a very long process from the 15th or even earlier century that culminated in the actual industrial revolution and its close relationship to capitalism in the 18th and then in the 19th century. So those who question the concept of scientific revolution, even they do not question Thomas Kuhn's main contribution, that is the concept of the paradigm and the underlying concept behind the paradigm, that our knowledge is not an adequate and close description of reality, but it is a structure in which we use certain methods to describe our world, and we can change our worldview. He calls this way of seeing, and this would entail a new paradigm on that specific reality that he still thought is out there. Could you please mute yourself? Thank you. Paul Feyerabend, an Austrian, who started out as physicist in the 20s and 30s, was part of the Vienna Circle, studied with Heisenberg, and studied quantum physics, and I'm pretty sure, although he only wrote quite little about quantum physics, but he obviously very well understood the basic principles of quantum theory. He shifted during his PhD studies, actually, in the 30s, and started to study the philosophy of science, and went to study with Wittgenstein, who also an Austrian, but by that time Wittgenstein lived in London. Unfortunately, by the time he arrived, Feyerabend, to London to study, to complete his PhD studies, Wittgenstein died in 1951. Anyway, Feyerabend, in his Against Method, famous book, developed the idea that there are no methodological rules that must always be used by scientists. His view was, Against Method, that there could be numerous or actually endless ways to describe reality and to address reality. He called himself a theoretical anarchist, and this theoretical anarchism, that is, no one structure, no one type of knowledge, no one method is to be accepted. And in his later work, after Against Method, he also turned his attention and our attention to how then science should be governed, and came up with the idea that science actually should be governed by the people, and suggested that science should be placed under, and I quote, under social governance. He thought that this methodological or theoretical anarchism, which is a more humanitarian way of looking at both social and natural phenomena, and scientists themselves, as opposed to Michael Polanyi, who suggested that science and scientists should be a self-governing republic. He suggested, Feyerabend, that actually science and scientists should be placed under democratic control of society and societies at large. This is both radical but extremely important within the tradition that led up to RRI. Unsurprisingly, in the 80s, Feyerabend was called in the journal Nature, which is the most or highest impact science journal, he was called the worst enemy of science because of this. And I thought that not only that he is not the worst enemy, but actually he is the best friend of science. It's interesting that nature never apologized for that very strong criticism that it expressed of Feyerabend. So anyway, Kuhn and Feyerabend has started the tradition of what we today call science, society, and technology studies, reflecting on exactly the same way on the nature of scientific knowledge, and suggesting, Kuhn, that it was a series of revolutions or paradigm change, and Feyerabend suggesting that theoretical anarchism, no subscription to one type of method, one type of seeing, is desirable, and there should be more democratic control introduced. And if science is a political ideology, and if, as we learned from Marxist traditions, at least social sciences are as much a reflection as they are a construct of reality, then the most adequate way of doing and controlling or governing science is some form of democracy, as opposed to the authoritarianism that has been suggested by Michael Polanyi. While Kuhn obviously is extremely mainstream today and became mainstreamed in the late 20th century, 80s and 90s, he was definitely criticized left, right, and center when his book first appeared in 1962. Feyerabend was, when his book appeared in the 70s, was expelled almost from the scientific community. However, they were extremely important in leading up to what Bikert called the scientific or social construction of technology, arguing in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, that actually technology is part of the social world, and technologies are not developed or becoming real based on predetermined technological processes, engineering processes, but they're, as much as they are technological, they're also social constructs. And this stemmed, obviously, in the case of Bikert and the Scott tradition, from the conflicts of acceptance and rejection of specific technology. His famous book was about bicycles, and trying to understand how the bicycle evolved in the from the late 18th century or mid 18th century until the 20th century, both as a technological but also as a social construct. And then actually the woman who has introduced the name Science, Society, and Technology Studies, STS, Shaila Jasanoff from Harvard University, suggested that actually what we today think as science or technology are of social making, and this social making is not only impacts of certain social groups, but rather they're impacts of a social imagination of technology, and such imagination is what she calls civic epistemologies, is embedded in the performative activities of multiple players, not only engineers, but also policymakers, politicians, and other key stakeholders who then develop what she called socio-technical imaginaries. And such socio-technical imaginaries impact the future of technology, in some cases detrimentally. A good case in point is Austria again, and the case study that Jasonov and Kim in their seminal study about nuclear energy have investigated. They first looked at the socio-technical imaginaries of nuclear energy in South Korea, from which Kim originates, and the US, as Jasonov saw it, and understood that nuclear energy, the socio-technical imaginary of nuclear energy, is extremely differently placed within the social fabric of these two polities or these two societies, and have different social and technical meanings in these different polities. Austria is a case in point where nuclear energy is forbidden because Austrian society, partly from its transformation post-war, is absolutely and utterly opposing nuclear energy and the dangers that are associated with it. So in the late 90s, there's a strong movement of banning nuclear energy that resulted in a referendum that actually banned nuclear energy in Austria. So these socio-technical imaginaries are social means, political means to create specific technologies, or even to uncreate or unmake specific technologies, as it is seen in the case of Austria. So science, society, technology studies is another critical tradition. And a third critical tradition that I have to mention is gender, post-colonialism, and the Anthropocene thinking. Here, I would like to bring to your attention four major authors. I'm pretty sure you know all of them, but it's good to quickly run through their contributions to the critical traditions. Judith Butler, of course, preeminent American feminist theories, has questioned in the 70s and 80s, has questioned that certain gendered behaviors or gender is a natural, that is, biological concept, and suggested that these gendered behaviors are actually learned performances, and these gendered behaviors are what we commonly associate with femininity or masculinity, and they are performative. And if they are performative, then we have to understand them as such, and not take certain biological givens as also social givens. This was the birth, obviously, of feminist theory and feminist social science, and the critique of the social construct of the self related to the biological nature of manhood or womanhood. Eminent scholar of Indian origin, got her work is Spivak in the 70s in the Foucauldian tradition, looked at history writing, historiography, and suggested that social research is always colonial in not only describing the other that is over there in the colonies as the colonial subject, but also creating this other and this over there, obviously related to sites orientalism, suggesting that the object of study is, and the knowledge that is extracted from this object of study is just as much created both as the colonial subject and the colonialist subject, and it's mostly white men speaking to white men about colored men, and in many cases about colored women. So she, in the Foucauldian tradition, has suggested that these discursive institutions of scientific research should be scrutinized and should be regulated. And in some cases, they are actually shutting off post-colonialist or feminist scrutiny. So this is kind of the feminist tradition element of a critique of how we see the social and how we see also what we generally accept as the natural. And then Viveras de Castro, who coming from an anthropological tradition, introduced the concept of perspectivism that tried to encapsulate. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. That tried to introduce indigenous conceptions of reality and tried to develop alternative, not only alternative epistemologies, but also incorporate Amerindian mythologies and cosmologies, therefore introduce a different ontology in how we understand the world, and came to the conclusion, and this is kind of encapsulated in what's called now the anthropological or the ontological turn in the social sciences, that there are many worlds, not only many worldviews, but there are multiple worlds, all of them based on different mythologies and cosmologies. Crutzen is important that for the reason that he introduced the concept of the Anthropocene, which is a new geological era, something of the natural sciences. And this is basically the idea that what we consider to be the natural and how we see natural time evolving as encapsulated in geological phenomena is also altered by the intervention of the human, and the Anthropocene is a new geological era, not yet accepted as such, but discussed, in which it is accepted that the human has a constitutive element of intervention into what we traditionally consider to be the natural. So I know, again, this is extremely broad brush painting of the critical traditions, but it's important to see that what we today call RRI did not come out of nowhere. And what we took as the tradition of the scientific revolution and onwards has an alternative trajectory of the critical tradition of Marxism and post-structuralism, of STS and philosophy of science, critiquing the traditional view of the differentiation of the social and the natural, and the evolution of questioning the biological, that is natural, and the social from a gendered perspective, from a cosmology and mythology perspective, but also from a geological perspective, something, the Earth age and the specifics of the Earth age is not, again, something that is given by what traditionally is called by nature, but it is assumed, or at least can be assumed, that the human or humane intervention in geology is equally important, and we have, as Paul Crutzen argues, entered a new era, a new geological era that is called the Anthropocene. And there is a very important tradition that I have not mentioned, but Sardandu has, And this is what, especially in stemming from strategic management and economics, is called the stakeholder theory, accepting and suggesting that first, the firm is not something that is a natural phenomena in the world and the property only of its shareholders, but suggesting that it is part of a wide network of other stakes and the holders of these stakes. And originally, Freeman in the mid-80s has suggested that as a strategic management principle, that the stakeholders of a firm are those you see on my left: the government, competitors, consumers, employees, the civil society, suppliers, and shareholders. And to effectively manage the corporation, one needs to incorporate the needs and wants, that is, the stakes and risks of these stakeholders into the strategic management of the company or the firm. Donaldson and Mitchell and others have suggested a more dynamic theory of stakeholders, understanding specific stakeholders with their role both in the strategy of the corporation and also their social position, and came up, Mitchell and his co-authors have come up in the 1990s with what's called now a dynamic setup of theory of stakeholders, in which there are different types of stakeholders with specific social roles and specific relationships to the strategy or the potential strategy of the corporation: dormant, discretionary, dependent, demanding stakeholders. And to successfully manage the corporation according to stakeholder theory, you need to align certain strategies based on how much power, how much legitimacy, and how urgent the stakes and claims of specific stakeholders are. And you see just one example of how this is done on this slide. So this is another very important and relevant critical tradition that informed and impacted the evolution of what today we call responsible research and innovation. So to round this part of the discussion off, not only was society politicized, or not only were the social sciences seen as elements of or vehicles of a political ideology, not only was science by Kuhn and Feyerabend and others criticized and understood as one political ideology that changes over time, or that has to be placed under democratic control, but even the corporation, that is the core and most important element of capitalist societies, have also been politicized by stakeholder theory. I argue in my previous book that business firms are actually providing public goods, and they are also defining and enforcing public rules. Thus, firms become political actors. So CSR, as it emerged in the 80s and 90s, was then, in the 80s and 90s, a radically new approach to strategic management, originating in Stanford and then developed by Freeman and others, to call attention to how to best answer the question: who has a say in formulating the corporation's vision? Political CSR, as it has been developed in the early 2000s, was a recalibration of this original idea, but more politicized. and suggesting that in a globalized social world and corporate operations are in search of a new political legitimacy, or as others called it, a new license to operate even within capitalist societies. And this led, as we discussed yesterday, to principles of value production that were wider or more widely understood than financial, incorporating agendas of sustainability and agendas of the social. And I have theorized political CSR, incorporating ideas from critical and post-structuralist social theory that I've mentioned today, and also vested in behavioral economics, that there is a need for even a more politicized concept of the corporation, but not only politicized, but attuned to the democratic principles that govern societies in the late 20th century or late modernity. And this is what I called corporate stakeholder democracy. Here we seem to have a pretty full picture of the critical traditions that have input the emergence of responsibility, both in the corporate world, that is termed corporate social responsibility, but more importantly in science, research and innovation, what is called responsible research and innovation. So all of this suggests that in the late 20th century, early 21st century, to embed the corporation and to embed research and innovation into democratic Western polities, there needs to be a new economic vision, a new political vision, and a new social vision. And thus, stakeholder theory suggests a democratization of the firm, participatory research. I haven't mentioned this, but we can talk about this. Participatory research suggests the inclusive engagement of the different stakeholders into research and innovation processes. And the vision developed is not a realist and universalist, but a value-based progress that requires social embeddedness. So we started with a different type of economics, politics, and vision that has been developed in the post-war period, partly by Vannevar Bush and then by Michael Polanyi. But the critical traditions that I have brought to your attention, again, broad strokes, have been an attempt or a continuous attempt to democratize power knowledge, to democratize research and innovation. It has a different type of economics, stakeholder theory, and the democratization of the firm. It has a different type of science politics, participation, and inclusive engagement of different types of stakeholders, and a different type of vision that resulted in a value, or that is motivated by value-based progress, and also suggests the social embeddedness of both research and innovation and of science. So here today, you kind of have the full picture. And these critical traditions, as well as policies and politics of science, originating in the 17th century, but then having developed throughout the last 100+ years, have resulted in what today we call responsible research and innovation. Here are 4 different definitions that I want to suggest to you today. And in the tutorial, this will be our starting point and discuss how this can be addressed in praxis. So RRI is a transparent, interactive process by which social actors and innovators become mutually responsible responsive to each other with a view to the ethical acceptability, sustainability, and social desirability of the innovation process and its marketable products. RRI implies, not the definition, that societal actors work together during the whole research and innovation process in order to better align both the process and its outcomes with the values of society. And the European Commission's more bureaucratic definition, responsible research and innovation, is implemented as a package that includes multi-actor and public involvement in research and innovation, enabling easier access to scientific results that take up gender and ethics in the research and innovation content and process and formal and informal science education. The more poetic, but still true definition that comes from Jack Stilgoe and others is taking care of the future through collective stewardship of science and innovation in the present. More simple, taking care of the future in the present. So this is all for today. I know it's a lot to digest, but this is a short course, so we have to do it in broad strokes and in big steps. Thank you very much. The floor is yours. Any questions, comments, criticism, all of this are welcome.
Sir, may I?
Our most regular speakers, thank you. You're saving the day. This is always good. This is not a criticism at all. It's great that somebody starts the discussion. Yes, Siddharth.
Sir, I did kind of get a lot about the critical traditions that you kind of explained in the 20th century. But I would like to argue, or maybe rather than argue, put forth that I think before 20th century, it was Nietzsche's idea of, democratizing science. So what are your comments on that?
I agree with it, of course.
You didn't mention particularly in any of your presentations.
Yes, true. I mean, I haven't mentioned lots of others.
Yeah, but I think Nietzsche is something who has been quite influential.
True, and I haven't mentioned Wittgenstein also, and I haven't mentioned Heidegger, and I've not mentioned a lot of others. So,
yes.
So that's I put forward the caveat that this is cherry picking, and also cherry picking subjectively my taste. Although I like Nietzsche a lot, so do I like Wittgenstein and Heidegger. And a lot of other theorists. I haven't mentioned Latour, John Law, who are important in the STA. My most favorite philosophers, Hannah Arendt. So obviously, the critical tradition is wide and broad, and this was cherry picking. And I agree definitely that Nietzsche is a central figure to much of the criticism that traditional worldviews, rather, should hold. Therefore, he is also marginalized, as he was in his lifetime as well. But you're right. He has a very important and influential place within this critical tradition. I just wanted to put forward the idea, and lots of others can be mentioned. But my goal was partly to overwhelm you with certain ideas and thinkers, but also show, and this is, I think, the more important element, to show that as opposed to traditional histories of responsible research and innovation that mainly focus on ethics or on social acceptance of specific technologies and suggest that this is an issue that emerged in the early 2000s when certain controversies of specific technologies or scientific ideas were debated and discussed. What I wanted to show is that there is a much longer tradition that responsible research and innovation builds upon. But I agree with Nietzsche.
Sir, I think that's true, so true, and also because Nietzsche was kind of predecessors of all the thinkers and philosophers that you mentioned in your presentation. So I think we can safely say he might have been one of the proponents of this particular idea, to be precise.
Absolutely so. Absolutely so. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
There are a number of hands. Abhinandan, please.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Just a minute. Yeah. Professor Brown, it was interesting to hear regarding the contribution of different scholars when you're talking about the whole critical insights regarding technology and discourse of technology and the debates that have been happening. I'm just wondering that when you said that one of the scholars said about the research is colonial. So, whether when you talk about the whole word that research is colonial, whether the discourse of research till date, when you talk about 21st century, do you think at one point it is still carrying the legacy of the colonial hangover? Because this is something very important, because when you talk about the way how the whole world is being perceived and placed, that too in a very recorded and documented manner, how it is being expressed and what are the perspective that has been taken, that is most of the important thing, that sometimes we of course read the whites, but we left the blacks. So I'm not trying to be racial here, but the way how it is being narrated and how it is being perceived. And secondly, I was just thinking, because I was reading the Professor Sheila Jashunov's contribution regarding the role of different societies, how they react to different technologies and their way of reasoning. If I remember this Stephen Friedman's the world is flat, and if I look into the whole idea of the globalized world, now in that whole situation, when you talk about that it is okay, the world today is globalized, where is the position of that value-based interest? Where is the position of so-called the difference in culture? That sometimes worries me, because as an idea, of course, when you talk about the model of RRI, yes, of course, it's a very good model. But these are some of the concerns that actually worry me, that when you talk about the world today that we are living. That's that's just something which I want to share. Just want to hear from you, because of course you also do not have a direct answer to it. I think there are sometimes these are the questions that comes in your mind.
Absolutely. Thank you for both of the comments. I think both are very relevant. Probably you haven't heard my intro lecture, where I placed a number of caveats, one of them being that RRI, as we know it today, is a very European concept. And one of my core arguments was that not only is RRI a very European concept, but the whole science as we know it is a very European concept that originates in the 17th century, fights over certain territories in the belief systems of Catholicism and Protestantism. To cut the long story short, yes, of course, and that's my fear. I think there is too little decolonization or post-colonialism within our scientific thinking. And the ontological turn in anthropology, for one, and the ontological turn in the social sciences point towards the inclusion of such alternative non-European or non-global North worldviews. Absolutely. And this is quintessential to get to a better science, if you will. Also, this should apply equally to the natural sciences. Not yet. very much applied. So absolutely, we need more decolonization, and we need more post-colonialism. And our current systems, and I have to disappoint you, the thing that we're doing now, lecturing in a university setting, is also part of the colonizing tradition of the global north. Universities and this type of distribution of knowledge is a very Western global north scientist or scientific tradition, not good. And as Sylvia Wynter, the Jamaican American theorist of ontological colonialism, suggested, even after colonialism, everything is still colonial, and universities and knowledge and science are prime examples. If you turn this around and ask me, is RRI a good enough way to decolonize? As it is now, definitely not. What I am going to suggest by the end of next week is that we need to rethink RRI, partly also in terms of decolonization and how a post-colonial RRI is at all imaginable.
Thank you for the lovely comments. Actually, it will really be at some point to introspect once and again. Why I raise this, because I come from a field, and my experience with the field whole understanding is that when we go to the field and in terms of ecological understanding, most of the times we have seen that government or the state, you could say so, are committed for, no doubt, for conservation of wildlife species and all. And they're more concerned while creating national parks. But what they do is that they create national parks, but in between they actually disturb the whole space, and they create concrete. That means development. Now, here is a problem that, of course, one would say that here the government is very much concerned about conservation, talking about the biodiversity, talking about tomorrow's future generations concern. But they actually kill the corridors. They actually killed the corridors, and because of which the elephant corridors are now in conflict with the industrial corridors. And once and again, if you look into elephant corridors, it is again connected with also with the community interactive space, because the Forest Rights Act in India, what we talked about, including the generation which has been staying in the forest, how they are being at some point of time not being taken in concern, because they've been living there for generation to generation. The indigenous knowledge is there. And at some point, this indigenous knowledge is nowadays getting evaporated, vaporized every time you talk about development. Now, when you think about value-based laden concept, these are some of the issues that, okay, you talk about development, you talk about, say, for example, including the so-called the Indian culture, but then what is exactly the vibrancy or the rainbow of Indian culture that we're talking in future? That's what I placed this. That's why I thought I should put up on the table today. Thank you.
Thank you for this. While you were mentioning conservation, I have read a beautiful study on a critical approach to conservationism. I'll try to dig it up, and it brings to the fore some of the issues that you mentioned. I think it's originating in Australia, but I'm not sure, but I'll try to dig it up. Swati and then Saradindu.
So a quick comment, actually, I don't agree with the what you said about the university system being very much, because we have a long tradition in India. There was Nalanda and all those. But what I'm telling, how I look at colonialism is not only a Western phenomena. Here in India, there has been caste system, which is very much close to colonizing lower caste by upper caste, and knowledge system especially has been dominated by Brahmins. And there are a lot of like subaltern critique or critique from below, which those who have said that after coming of the Western style of education, many of us, including females, actually, we were denied education in the previous systems, being able to attend universities and explore on our ideas. That's my idea, actually. So I'm not favoring or defavoring, but yeah, we already had a tradition. So what I want to ask about, like, we have talked about a lot of philosophers, and then they kind of how they formulated open science and how how to decolonize, and this is a Western tradition. All criticality and everything is fine. Like, but where is the role of people's movement? If we are talking about philosophers only, then we are not opening up enough again. Like, somebody validated a had a access to a language and validated a particular kind of knowledge, then we are agreeing, okay, fine, this is their contribution and this thing. But I think in RRI, people's movement, especially for in the domain of like anti-science movements, there have been anti-technology movements have been there. Like after Fukushima in Japan, there had people's like perception or like movement forced the government to dephase their nuclear power plant based model. And same thing is happened, like anti-nuclear power generation sentiment in Germany also. No, so it's like people's also like really important actually, if we are talking about responsibility and everything. And I think we need to acknowledge role of people's movement as well. And the second thing is, I want to ask about like taking care of the future in the present. It's a very good definition actually, but how it is different from like what we are hearing about sustainability. This is the thing about also said about this is sustainability is about taking care of the future in the present actually. So, and how it's like different from foresights or anticipation. So it's like methodologies only. It's an intent. I can see the intent, but I want to have some light on this.
Thank you, Swati. It's again, it's a lot. I'll answer in the same way as I answered the question on Nietzsche. You're right, absolutely so. I think people's movement should be incorporated in the critical traditions, and obviously not only the anti-nuclear movement, but suffragettes in the early 20th century, and many other movements that reflected upon the elite's understanding and the elite's positions on how society and knowledge, etc., was organized. And I agree with that. Again, I had to cherry pick, and my argument is enriched by these comments. They're not changed in the sense that the main message I wanted to carry through was that RRI didn't pop up from nothing or nowhere. And yes, you're right, people's movement are part of that. When saying that universities and what we're doing now is a colonizing tradition, I'm not saying that universities were not present in India. Actually, partly still originating in knowledge production stemming from Greece via Persia. But that's not the point. The point is that universities, as they are created, managed, run today, are a very specific form of governance of science or research and innovation. So while universities bear the same name, and some of the traditions in Europe and elsewhere go back of the specific universities and the university system to the early or Middle Ages, 13th, 14th, 12th centuries, those universities were very different institutions. And what I wanted to say is that the modern university, the university as we know it today, is a colonial institution. This said, the rest I agree with. Obviously, your interpretation of colonialism as not only West east or north, south, but also elite and non-elite appropriation of both space and of politics is absolutely acceptable and right, and I can second that. Although my knowledge is obviously limited of the case system, something I know of, but you must know much more than I do. In response to what you mentioned about RRI, I think that's a long discussion to be had, and I hope that some of the next lectures will shed more light. Obviously you are very well versed, so you won't hear too much new things, but not everybody is so well versed. We need to move on. Saradindu.
First of all, thank you very much for this enlightening discussion. And I also liked some of the previous comments. And I think my comment, although when I thought about it, I thought it was a very original comment, but after hearing Abhinandan and Swati, I think it's not that original, and maybe it somehow links to what they have also been trying to say, what they have been raising. My point is about the politics of inclusion. When we say inclusion, I mean, I sometimes wonder what kind of, is there or could there be kind of an optimum form of inclusion, or a more desirable vis-a-vis less desirable form of inclusion? Because even in my research on frugal innovation, when I go and talk to people that, these days, participatory is a very popular expression. We all did it with the participation of the local community. Then I ask a follow-up question often that, okay, what do you mean by participation? What kind of knowledge from that society was useful? And most of the time, the answer that I get is, yeah, I mean, they could tell us the need, which was difficult for us to assess. Now, to me, sometimes it feels that knowing the need of the community is a very primary form of inclusion. The question comes when you wanted to solve or offer a solution in terms of an innovation, did you incorporate some knowledge of those communities of how to solve that problem in terms of which technology should be used, how it should be used, a particular mechanism of action? And most often the answer is either negative, or, yeah, I mean, I don't really remember such things. Now that is where I was stuck about this, concept of inclusion. And there are papers which are now coming up to say that, okay, in the name of polycentric innovation, it's being captured by the more powerful entities this way and that way. So I just thought of pricking your head. I mean, as a philosopher, how do you reflect on such a problem? Is it a problem, or it's not a problem? We are making it a problem, maybe because of our own biases and sensitivities.
Thank you for the question. I think all of these comments are revolving around some of the core questions in RRI, and inclusion and the usefulness of inclusion is obviously at the center. As my good friend Saradindu always says, you, I hope, will get an answer in the coming sessions to this question, because I definitely want to problematize most of the concepts that are the building blocks of our current understanding of RRI, inclusion being one. To put it simply, and to not leave it at that, Two comments. One of the problems with inclusion as it is now is, and this is obviously a problem with democracy, that people can only imagine what they can imagine. And thus, there is always a limitation in the knowledge, even if used and included, how different such knowledge is from all the other ideas that are flying around, because the social, political, and scientific imaginations are limited. And I think this is one question one must address, and how to open up such imaginations, and how to decolonize, and this is something I will use, how to decolonize the knowledge or knowledges that are included within inclusion, and how to de-scientify, if you will, such knowledges. And at least in Europe, one of the problems is that the scientific revolution, if you will, and the nature social divide, and all what a scientific rational worldview entails is so pervasive that even with whatever inclusion we can bring to the table, even in defining research agendas, our options are very limited. And people do believe in science, unfortunately, and are not ready to question the basic tenets of the scientific revolution. So I think that inclusion as we know it today is no panacea, because it does not necessarily bring the new knowledge that is required to radically challenge the position of the mainstream, as it was suggested in democratizing knowledge production or innovation, if you will. And I think this is one of the core questions, how we can rethink, and I'll talk about this, how we can rethink all these concepts, research, responsible research and innovation being one, to be more inclusive, but not only inclusive in quantitative terms, but if you will, qualitative terms, to really include a decolonizing, new knowledge, radical break with the mainstream in whatever territory or area we operate in. So this was the short of it. I fully agree with the premises of the question, and I also obviously agree, as now you said, new papers are coming up that democratization or the inclusion of different publics is no panacea, because politics and political hierarchies are still there in a number of ways. I have a paper under review on exactly this, in the area of the quadruple helix innovation, which obviously, as suggested by Campbell and Karayanis, was a democratic process in which civil society or society at large is included and involved in the research process. And we have done a 4-year project to address these questions, and obviously concluded that it doesn't happen. And we have a number of reasons, mostly political, why it doesn't happen. And therefore, quadruple helix or any other kind of democratization as such is no solution to open up the space of innovation or research or science.
Thank you. There is one question in the chat box. We may have missed that, by Tanya. Maybe you could.
Yes, Tanya, can you ask that question, please?
Yes, sir. So, sir, I wanted to ask that can we say globalization and the internet world is creating a global village as a catalyst in research and innovation as a process? Like it has been actively getting huge participation from the masses regularly in the social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and even Google, and the sites that are actually publishing the papers.
Well, the short answer is I don't know. An even shorter answer is that there is no silver bullet, I don't think. The longer answer is yes. Globalization and the global village, etc., helps to open up, but no, it also helps to close down. Because of what we have just discussed with Saradindu, that that power positions are so ingrained in the social fabric that infrastructures such as internet or globalization won't radically change this. Actually, sometimes just the opposite. And that we see that with social media platforms, that there is an extremely strong scientification of knowledge, but also there is a strong anti-science movement in the bubbles and these two worlds are not uniting, but getting further apart. And these further apartness might result in extremely dire consequences, one of which was, sorry to be very openly and directly political, the election of Trump as the president of the US. So it's a mixed blessing, I have to say.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So you are on mute.
Yes, Swati has also a question. Love that, how to de-scientify, how to move away from proof validating knowledge. Well, these are the big questions. I think that it's not the question how to move away from proof validating knowledge, but what we consider the world to be, of which we have knowledge, of which we're looking for proof. And I think we are, hopefully, in paradigm changing times, and the ontology turn and complexity turn and the spatial turn, all of these turns, as they're called in the social sciences, reflect upon or bring elements of this paradigm change, none of which are conclusive, but what we in hindsight see as the scientific revolution and the shift from transcendental space to a spatialized transcendence, as I called it, was an extremely long, complicated, and multi-element process. And I can only hope that we are similarly undergoing such change. Yes, there are more questions than answers, but I don't think that the question is what kind of proof can we bring or how to move away from proof that is validating knowledge, but other things. Ladies and gentlemen, let's do a 10-minute break. So see you at my time, 12:40. What is your time now?
So 16:57.
How much? What was the time?
16:57.
So it's 5 o'clock. So let's
Yeah.
meet at 5:10. Okay. Short break,
Okay.
10 minutes, and then we go on with the next session.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you're back. Could you please give me a heads up if everybody is back? Sardindu is back.
Yes.
Siddharth is back. Madhur is back. Excellent. Very good. Okay. Let me start sharing my screen again. This you'll see is a different presentation, although it starts the same way. So this is the definition, just to recap. So the original definition of RRI by von Schoenberg from 2012, who is actually a bureaucrat in the European Commission, who is responsible for RRI, was that RRI is a transparent and interactive process. You also, in the previous discussion, asked me, I like the Jack Stilgoes definition, taking care of the future in the present. Now going down to shop floor level, if you will. This is what we have been talking about, and our conversations have been revolving around, although on a high philosophical level. Science and technology, or research innovation, brings knowledge, generates well-being, and contributes to development. However, it also poses ethical dilemmas, and they have undesirable impacts, and they then, in exchange, generate new challenges. So this is a shop floor level understanding why we need science, a critical science, or responsible research and innovation. I wanted to start with a Kahoot. I don't know if you have ever done Kahoots. Have you done Kahoots? Or do I need to explain? I stopped sharing for a sec. Has everybody experienced Kahoot?
No.
No. Okay, so it's an inclusive quiz. All of us can participate in. 10 questions, multiple answers. You'll have 20 seconds to choose from the answers. You'll have a screen, either on your mobile phone or your computer. The link is in the chat. You will have to click on that link, and it'll take you to a website where there is a prepared quiz for you. It's also a competition. Normally with my students, I offer them chocolate at the end. This time I can't do that with you because you're pretty far away. I can't. Normally I throw a piece of chocolate, packed of course, to the student who won. It would be a very long shot this time. So we have to think of some other reward. Anyway, I'll share my screen, which will be this time the Kahoot itself. Yes, you're logging on. Excellent. I'll turn on the music. Please log on. We have 2, 4, 6, 8 people logged on. Nine people. Guys, log on. You don't have to give your real name. You can do however you want. 10 people. We still are missing some. We're 28 in the course, so we need some more people. And once it's started, it's hard. So please join. Thank you, Tanya, for having sent the link again. $12 people.
There's some problem. So we just have to log in using first Google, right? Or own account?
No. You just have to click on. You need any kind of browser, and then just click on the link.
Oh, where is the link?
But
which one? Achha.
The link is in the chat.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
But you can also go to Kahoot.
Yeah, but there was
.it, and then there is a game pin that you must see now. You can also use, if you're using your mobile phone, you can use the QR code.
Let me just try.
Okay, we wait 2-3 more minutes. Please join. We have 14 people.
Nickname? Nice.
Pardon?
Nickname is mine. Okay, fine.
Whatever nickname you want to give.
Like
real name or not real name, whatever you want.
So it says I'm in, but.
And I see you. Sardindo,
okay.
You're in.
Right.
You just have to wait now until I start.
Sure.
Okay, we have 16 people. One more and then we start, okay? So somebody else still needs to join. So, rules. You'll see questions, you'll see answers, you choose the right answer. Speed matters. So it's not only the right or wrong answer, but speed also matters. So both who finds the right answer and finds the right answer the quickest is the one who is winning. So this is a very capitalist game. So I'm sorry for that. One more person to join, and then we can start. Thank you. So 1, 2, 3. Watch out. This is your Kahoot. 3, 2, 1, go. This is a quiz, 9 questions. First question, what is RRI? Thank you. As you saw, you have 5 people who answered correctly. 6 were quick, but not so.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I am not getting the questions on my screen.
How come? How come?
I'm not sure. There was no question, and suddenly then I got it incorrect.
Same here, actually. I could not see the questions, and suddenly.
Okay, I don't know why is that. I am not in control of the system, but I'll read out the question next time around. Okay, so I hope that you will see the question. The first question was, what is RRI? Sorry for those who didn't see the question. Obviously, there were 3 potential answers, and I'm using this to teach also. So what is RRI? It's about outcomes. R&I, actors work towards ethically and socially acceptable products. It's about processes. It's about diversity, inclusion, anticipation, and reflection. And also key policy agendas, open access, gender equality in science and ethics, etc. All 3 are correct. So RI is both, or also about processes, outcomes, and policy agendas. So these are the three core elements of RRI. Prepare. Next question is coming up. Puna is ahead. Shelly, Ashish, and Tanya runners up. So next question. Where does RRI come from? Question again. Where does RRI come from?
I'm facing the same problem. I'm seeing geometrical shapes.
Me too. Me too.
Sir, same problem again.
Me too.
Same here.
So same here.
What is the problem?
Sir,
There's no
I'm-
question showing.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yes, questions are not appearing on the screen.
It's all triangles.
There's no question displaying.
But
Sir,
is there an answer displaying?
No.
No, sir.
Sir, actually, the screen you are sharing, we can see from that only, and then we have to go to that link, and then we have to take the right answer.
Yeah, maybe that is a better way to do it.
You should you should not look at the shared screen.
Okay.
You should look at your own screen where you have entered the game. So you should go to Kahoot.it, enter the game pin, which is 9776558, and watch that screen where the question and the 3 or 4 potential answers come up. Okay? So,
Sir, can you repeat the code?
yes, the code is 9776558. Let me put it in the chat. I stop sharing. So this is the code. So go to your own screen. Everybody is logged in?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I could start the whole thing again and see how it works this time, okay? Then I now stopped, so I'll give you a new pin. I didn't know that this was so complicated. So now I'll give you a new link and a new code. So please go here. This is the link. And if you don't want to do it with the link, then this is your game pin. It's okay. Tanya is in. It's one, 3, 1, 6, 3, 8, 1. $12 people already logged in. 14. We had 3 more in the previous round. 15. We lost someone, so we only have 14. 15. 2 more, and then we start. 16. 1 more. Excellent. So 1, 2, 3. I'm starting. Stay on this screen. What is RRI? This we have tested, so you know the answer.
Still, there is the same problem, sir.
No. How is it in the same problem?
It's the same
Question
problem
is not
again.
displaying.
I think you please share your screen. At least there the questions were visible. Now there are no questions.
This is very strange because I should be seeing the same screen as you are. Nobody's seeing the question and nobody's seeing the potential answers?
No.
No, sir.
Same problem.
No.
Okay.
We could see the questions on your shared screen, but not on our screen.
Okay. Then I'll share my screen and hope that it'll work. So let's see. Do you see, what do you see now?
Yeah, we see the question.
We see the questions and answers both.
You see the questions and answers now.
And we all do good when questions are repeated.
Okay. So then, here's your next question. Do you see it now? Where does RI come from? Okay, so where does RI come from? Right answer was it comes from the idea of technology assessment, policy, and corporate business. 12 people got it right. It's obviously not, unfortunately, developed by philosophers of science like myself. Also not developed by ethicists, and also not developed by gender theorists. Why do you think I mentioned these three other areas in the question? The reason being that these territories are actually competitors to the idea of responsible research and innovation. So the critical approach in the philosophy of science is another group of people who dislike the idea of responsible research and innovation. Ethicists think that technology ethics is the way forward. And also gender theorists think that when it comes to policy, gender is more relevant than RI. So these four areas, RI, that stems from technology assessment and business innovation, is in many times and ways in contradiction with these other three critical theories of research and innovation. Let's move on. Next question. Are you prepared?
Yeah.
Yes. Good. So this is how we are. So I didn't do in third place. What are the domains of RI as seen as the European Commission? Okay, you're good. 10 people got it right. The European Commission calls these the 6 keys of RI. These are the policy fundamentals: gender, governance, ethics, open access, science education, and public engagement. These are the areas which together are shoved under one umbrella called responsible research and innovation. However, there is a competing idea of what's called open science, and this stems from open access and free publication by all. A strong criticism within the European Commission exists of the scientometric, bibliometric, and publishing governance of science. So open access or open science is a competing area which wants to do less and wants to do more by less. So this is another conflict within the European Commission on RRI. So let's see how we are. MK, very good. Una Akib and Sardindu in 5th place. So, Professor, you have to do better. Let's move on. Question number 4. Where does RRI originate from? Okay, excellent. So you didn't know the answer. Actually, it originates from the science controversies of the early 2000s, mainly some of which we have mentioned. Swati has alluded to the anti-nuclear movement of the late 90s, early 2000s, but also the GMO conflicts, gene modification, and nano and biotechnology, and other science controversies that have dominated the science ethics scene. Why I mention the conflicts between the US, Russia, and China in science is that there's another emerging territory that becomes more and more relevant, and it's called technological or scientific sovereignty. And scientific sovereignty or technological sovereignty is a concept in which these major powers, US, Russia, China, and Europe, are competing over dominance, both of supply chains, but also of knowledge, innovation, and the resulting technologies. As we have discussed a few minutes ago, global South, global North political challenges play, unfortunately, little in the emergence of RRI. I think that they should be more central place in the RRI discussions, and the ethical apprehension of scientific facts is a contradiction in terms. Scientific facts cannot be ethically apprehended. Ethical apprehension is about decisions, human decisions, right and wrong. It was just a trick. So, next question. Let's see how we are in the meanwhile. MK still leading, but anything can happen. So, 5th question. Responsibility in research is the remit of RFOs, research funding organizations, RPOs, research performing organizations, individual researchers, the government, and regulatory bodies. Again, a pretty mixed answer sheet. The right answer is individual researchers. Responsibility stems from ethics and an ethical understanding of the role of the researcher. It obviously can be supported and policy level implemented by research funding organizations, and this is a discussion we're having right now with the European Commission and research funding organizations, trying to understand how their decisions are made, how their evaluation processes are made, but responsibility lies with the individual researchers. Same applies to institutions, research performing organizations. They can do a lot. They can spread the word, they can educate, they can train, but responsibility in research is the remit of the individual researcher. Government and regulatory bodies do have a role. Again, they can raise awareness, they can spread the word, they can issue recommendations, but in the end of the day, it is responsibility that is always with the individual researchers. So let's see how we are doing. M&M, congratulations, you're almost there. So let's see. Next question. Responsible research and innovation applies methods that originate in empirical and quantitative social sciences, the natural sciences, ethnomethodology, and participatory action research, or none of these. Congratulations, 6 people had it right. Yes, definitely empirical and quantitative social sciences play very little, if at all, role in responsible research and innovation methods, because as we have discussed a few minutes ago, responsible research and innovation is mostly about inclusion and participation, less about the empirical and definitely quantitative research. It's not originating in the empirical, realist, classical study of the natural sciences, but it does originate in the phenomenological and participatory types of research that blurs the barriers between the research objects and the research subjects, between researchers and research subjects, and tries to bring a more societal understanding, a more experiential and experimental approach to research processes. So it is grounded, or it originates in these 2 core areas of research methods that have been developed in the mid 20th century and onwards. Ethnomethodology, which is a method that's helping researchers observe in a participatory way their research subjects, and participatory action research, which is partly involving different set of research subjects, but also it's action oriented and therefore blurs the line between the researcher and the research subject. So this is kind of the methodological base that that responsible research innovation applies. So let's see how we are doing. Okay, no much change. And the next question, 7th question. Scientific excellence and RRI are mutually exclusive, almost the same thing. They're different but aligned. All of the above. Correct. The majority got it right. They're different concepts, but may be aligned. And this is something that we are or will be talking about in the next sessions. They are mutually exclusive, as they are right now, but that's not necessarily so. They're definitely not the same thing yet. So maybe my choice was incorrect. I could have said all of the above. Sorry for those 5 who chose all of the above. They might also be right, actually, but the majority got it right. So, penultimate question, change in the score sheet. Okay, so we're almost there. Penultimate question, responsible research and innovation is globally known and accepted, globally discussed, but there are local varieties. Not accepted at all, it originates in Europe and only known in Europe. Yes, sir. As my daughter always says, it is discussed, but there are local varieties. Um, um, I don't know if it's only known in Europe, but there's an American journal called the Journal of Responsible Innovation. There are a number of papers also out from excellent Indian and Chinese scholars. So it is discussed. And yes, there are local varieties. This is something that Sarah Dindu and I yesterday and the day before yesterday have been discussed. Stemming from different perception of research and innovation, family resemblance to frugal innovation and CSR. And it is not yet globally known and accepted. So let's see, before the last question, this is how we're doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is your last question from the Kahoot of today. RRI, CSR, and frugal innovation are entirely different concepts, are related. They share a stakeholder orientation and sustainability agenda, are related by a profit orientation and capitalist desire. They're not related, but stem from different approaches to innovation and business. Oh, you're too good. Excellent. Absolutely right. 10 people got it perfectly right. They're absolutely related. They share a stakeholder orientation and a sustainability agenda, as we have discussed, and both Sarah Dindu and myself have emphasized. Okay, so let's see where we are and who won. So the podium, number 3, excellent, MK. Number 2, ABCD, and the winner is with 4,312, seed D. Congratulations also to M&M and Swati. I stopped sharing. I hope you liked the game. What did you think? Was this fun?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Once we solved the technical issues, it went pretty well. Okay, so I can do it again.
Only disagreement I would have with the question of scientific excellence and RRI maybe. I mean, in India, for example, when there is this policy on RRI or social responsibility of scientists, when it was framed, the main fear of the scientists was that shall we do our own work or we have to go and do outreach activities? So, you know, how really is to reconcile with this difference, and given that it is an individual responsibility.
I agree with the implications of the question, and why I put it in there is, you know, most of these questions I put in there not to have a right or wrong answer, but to be discussion starters. And I think this is a discussion to be had. Correct? The current version and understanding of excellence, scientific excellence, which is obviously based on bibliometric output and peer review processes and high impact publications and the age factor and the likes, or the age index and the likes, is currently in contradiction with what RRI preaches. The question is this necessarily to be had this way? And my argument would be that we can redefine excellence to include, and moreover, as the English saying goes, we treasure what we measure. So if we measure inclusion, if we measure how the research agenda is formulated with multiple knowledges included, how dissemination is done, not only in scientific high impact journals, but elsewhere, then that's what we are going to treasure. And that's what then we will call excellence. So actually, this is the debate that is going on, or this is one of the debates that is going on within the RRI research community. Actually, there is a big endeavor of the European Commission, which I am also involved with, which is called Reforming the European Research Arena. And one of the territories it wishes to reform is excellence, and how excellence is measured, how excellence is incentivized, because you can cry your heart out and you can preach as much as you want that young researchers do research differently, but if they're measured and if they are getting tenure and jobs based on bibliometric quantifiable outputs, then they'll only do that, rightly so. So that's the big issue. How can you reform excellence to keep certain elements of the review process, also to aid scientific outputs that is intended towards the scientific community, but also enable and empower stakeholders to be included in the research process. And I think this is, there is no silver bullet, but it should and can be reconciled. And that's what I wanted to allude to. So let me share my screen, because there is a little bit more to today. And I hope you see my screen. Do you see full screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So again, we are shop floor. So what does it mean to do responsible research and innovation? Here are some questions that we can think of. During the research and innovation process, there are a number of decisions to be made. This concern the what and the when. In a more theoretical language, this is what we call scientific agenda setting. So these are a number of questions. Any of these ring a bell? How are you confronted with these? What do I want to investigate? Which innovation should be promoted? Which questions out of the many should be solved first? How do I come to a research question? What is more urgent? What can wait? What are the priorities? How do we decide on the distribution of resources? So, how does this relate to responsible research and innovation? What do you think? Anyone wants to comment or bring an example or discuss a real life issue when he or she was confronted with any of these questions about research agendas? Anyone wants to jump in? I don't see the raised hands. So one of you go ahead.
Hello.
Yes,
Sir,
go
am
ahead.
I audible?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm working in a malaria research lab. So in my department, there are other, including our lab, there's 10 more labs working on the same thing, malaria. So malaria is known in the world for more than, 100 years, and we are working on the same problem for 100 years. We have invested so much of dollars, so much of money, and manpower into this, but we are still chasing the same problem. So instead of choosing one problem, thousands of people working on the same problem, we should prioritize our research. We should investigate what we need to investigate, and it is the time where we should think, what we are working on. So we are working on the one disease for more than 100 years, and the outcome of that is still we are fighting with the malaria. So using the advanced technology, I think it should limitize. We must limitize the number of people working on one project only. So I think priority should be one of the things we should think before working or taking up the project.
This is an excellent example. The question is, and here is the question to you: who decides on what the priority should be? Is it the individual researcher? Is it the funding organization? Or do we engage and involve society at large, civil society, NGOs, non-governmental agencies? So how do we arrive at a prioritization? Because obviously, the example you mentioned, somebody made the priority that malaria should be researched. So somebody thought of this, or didn't think, but did nonetheless, and decided that this is the way forward. The question is, how can we do it differently? Or should we do it differently? How should we prioritize? What's a better way to prioritize?
Okay, so sir, we are working in our civil society. We have free will to work on any project, but somewhere funding agencies should put a limit to what extent a research project should be continued. For example, if a research funding from starting it states that okay, this much of the malaria project should be in one institute approved, only then we can prioritize the level of research happening in the industry or at the institute. So it should be at the funding level, because we have a free will to work. Any researcher can work on any project, but if it's not stated by the funding government, there will be no proper prioritization. So it should be on the end of the funding agencies, because only then people will realize, okay, we are responsible for our own research, and only then these two things will be implemented on the ground level. Because even if we talk about responsible research on the ground level, it is repeatedly happening. The repeated projects, repeated research, and everyone doing the same thing. So I think funding agencies should implement these ideas on the ground level.
Thank you. I think, yeah, this is one of the dilemmas. Thank you for suggesting. Swati, you're next.
Yeah, I would like to share my experience actually while deciding for my PhD topic. There is some time we get actually. So during that time, I wanted to work on women's safety in public transportation. So what I faced, the oversimplification of problems. Usually we oversimplify problems, like women's safety is a problem in public transportation in a very technocratic and scientific or rational sense. But once I went to the field, I realized it's such a complicated problem. The safety itself has not been defined actually. So, and then who should be defining that safety actually? whether like women who are traveling or using those public transportation every day, or the experts or policymakers, or even the like activists who are like active in that area, their voices should be heard, or the like women normal who are like traveling every day. So I it was a wicked problem for me, because I didn't know what it mean to be like safe for women. So what I did as a thing, like I came up with a model that and within like women category there were different women's actually, based on different age, different educational background, economic profile, and all those things. So I came up with like I'll use some kind of, I'll give weightage with a group, and then so my whole thing was based on like stakeholders. So I think people themselves be defining, because they are getting affected. So I think we should move away from the in RRI at least, the language of actors to stakeholders, because actors can be many, but stakeholders are those who are directly impacted by those policies or initiatives or innovations.
Thank you, Swati. This is an excellent example. Since it is my field, automobility, or this is. Can you please mute yourself? Okay, so this is an excellent example, and safety most of the time is defined by engineers and policymakers, who most of the time are elite white men. And there is a safety discourse out there in both public transport and transportation in general. And then there are a number of voices that are silenced, and whose safety is not attended to. And I think the example that Swati mentioned is an excellent example of shifting the priorities, asking the questions. What kind of questions should we investigate? What is the real problem here? And whose problem it is? So thank you, Swati. That was really enlightening. Ashish, you're next. Or no, sorry, Tanya. Tanya, sorry.
Yes, sir. So I just wanted to add on that I was reading one article from Giovanni Sartori that where he just discusses that one should ask what and how, then asking why, to make it specific and prioritize the main issue in the research question or objective you are into, and then just generalizing everything like just Swati mentioned. So like I actually find it really fascinating that political scientists actually are working on it from like a decade ago or maybe more. So yeah, I just wanted to add on it.
Perfect. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay. Is there anyone else? Manisha, I think your hand is up. Manisha? Okay. She doesn't seem to hear us. Abhinandan, you're next.
Yeah, actually, I was hearing to. Can you? Yeah, okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Now, I was just hearing to Swati's point, and I'm just trying to look it, of course, in a very similar manner, but with a different context. Like, just curious that when you talk about RRI, what is the position of market we are taking here? Because many a times when you talk about us.
You muted yourself.
Yeah.
Could you repeat?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay.
Could you repeat, please?
Yeah. So what is the position of the market when you are talking about the whole entire concept of RRI? Because when we look into the model that you have asked, like what is the question that one should ask before you start a project in that particular framework, is that many a times we have seen in the field that whenever we go for any type of issues to be addressed, we think that, okay, we should start with the demand-based understanding, that what the community used to talk about. Then we can talk about the research question, and finally we go for addressing the wider ambit. But what happened is that because of certain market forces, now it has become very difficult to at some point to distinguish whether it is a demand-based side of the story or is it a supply-based side of the story. Because sometimes what happened, the supply side becomes also to an extent a demand-based, because the community gets attuned to such type of market forces, and there it gets clouded that what is exactly the issue. Is it the issue that is being coordinated by so-called the supply, or is it the demand side?
Okay, does anyone want to answer this? I don't want to monopolize the discussion. So who would have an answer to Abhindan about where is the demand side? Who would like to answer here? If nobody, then I'm happy to pitch in. I think one of the orientations would be that it is the demand. However, and this is what we have been discussing with Shardindu earlier, that an economic orientation is only one possible orientation, and there could be many other values that are involved and engaged in the decision setting the agenda. And it's not only demand, but societal progress or equity or privileging vulnerable groups. So there are many others that could play a role. But more importantly, demand is obviously also not a static phenomena. And one can also think of behavioral economics, which argues that what we consider to be demand based on cost benefit is not that simple, because prospect theory would suggest that people make different decisions under risk. Therefore, what we think demand is also laden with many heuristics. What we think demand is also full of power. And we think, again, my field, that people do demand cars and automobility-oriented transportation, but we all know that there has been 100 years of investment in creating this demand via the imaginaries that has been put forward by different agents of automobility interest. So what we consider demand to be is a complex and fuzzy phenomena that also needs to be critically assessed. Okay, let's look at the next slide. And this is another type of question that that RRI would suggest to ask. This, if the first was the what and when, that is the agenda, this is the research process. This asks question about the how. Should I reflect on the long-term impact of my research? What about the impact on other fields? Do I do anything to anticipate myself and to improve that impact? What we have been discussing, apart from respecting the legal framework and basic ethical principles, do I have to think about shared social value in my research, such as inclusiveness or sustainability, things that are the values in the public domain? Or do I think, does my organization or science and technology think as a system? So not only do I develop an artifact, but from a system theory point of view, what I do in my research or in my innovation activities will be part of a system and will thus impact other elements of that system. Do I share my research with experts from other fields? Do I involve other fields? What do I think about end users or other stakeholders? Do I consider, this is the question Saradindu asked a few minutes ago, do I consider other knowledges and opinions? So, again, do you have any examples within your field of study or research or process in which you did or did not ask such questions? Can anyone enlighten us with some examples from real life shop floor? Manisha, if your hand is up, go ahead. Manisha?
Sir, I raised my hand earlier, so it's reflecting till now.
Okay. Okay, so then, yeah, go ahead. Okay, thank you. Ashish, you're up.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. In terms of a how question, the idea of the legal frame, as in what is expected as, medium via media between ethical principles and what is legal. There was this genetic research that was being conducted on a particular community, which involved the collection of blood samples of, members to profile them on the in terms of their susceptibility to certain lifestyle or other disorders, or which we call as non-communicable disorders. So I was part of the team that was monitoring the consent and the the informed consent issues with regard to the patient subjects. So there was a strong ethical component as to the fact that there is no regulation on the subject in India, and that the legal optimal is only related to the formation of blood banks or the collection of blood for the purposes of any research, but does not go down to specifically talk about what are the ethical dilemmas in collecting or profiling a particular community of people for susceptibility to particular diseases based on say unique demographics and perhaps income inequality, or the fact that just by virtue of sort of a racial connection with a particular community or a particular lineage, they become susceptible to certain kinds of disease. So there was a lot of ethical and legal entanglement which I confronted in framing the conduct of the research. I was not per se the person who was doing the research, but I was administering the research as such.
Thank you. Excellent, excellent example, and also proving the point that much of what we're discussing here today originated in such questions that Ashish has mentioned in biotechnology and nanotechnology. Biotech is a prime example of, and biobanks are prime examples of the early controversies in the 2000 and such questions moved beyond the law and moved beyond ethical considerations and tried to incorporate certain social values into their research. Okay, thank you, Ashish. Excellent example. Swati, go ahead. Swati? Do you hear us? No, she seems to be frozen. Then Apinandan, you're next.
I think, did I? No, I think I didn't raise the hand.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay. I'm sorry then. Okay. I mean, your hand is up, but then... okay, so anyone, any other example besides what Ashish has mentioned? Anyone has from his own or her own research any examples up for discussion? Okay, if not, okay, if not, then
I want to, but I have a very unstable internet connection. I might
okay, so go ahead,
in
Swati.
between actually.
Okay, go ahead, Swati.
Okay. So
now we hear you.
Because I have used this. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Since I have used this RRI framework for my conducting my research, so I have thought through all these questions, and I can give a specific example regarding this how. So once
Perfect.
I have conducted a pilot survey among women stakeholders in different part of the Delhi. After that, yeah, I was very much conscious, while writing and then while proceed further going into my research, that what I am thinking, writing, or collecting, whether it's my own version or it's their version actually. Then I did once I've written down the questions, then again I went to the same persons whom I have interviewed, and I asked them, is this the thing they wanted to say? And so I've done this 3 times, and each time I stand corrected actually, and then I myself realized this is how maybe we are privileging our own, from our own position, how we perceive real and or reality. Then we start showing that but it's different actually. It's very different when we actually do it actually. So yes, it's very important to share and then go back to again and again to different point of views.
Wow, this is an excellent example. Thank you, Swati. Both as critical reflection, but also as how an iterative process of reflection has to be included into the how, into the process. And this is exactly what action research actually does. What you have now described on an individual level, how you try to reflect and then check whether what you thought people said was actually what they thought and said, is the process of action research, in which people come up with ideas and then they iterate and then they reflect upon and then they experiment, and then that experimentation is taken back to the people and reiterated, replanned, reflected upon, and then done this in cycles. And I think this is very relevant of the how, and very different how science is being practiced as of now and today. We have only a few minutes left, so we have to go on. But thank you for these excellent interventions. I think these are much better and enlightening the problems than my theoretical contributions. someone has already, or many have already alluded to who makes the decisions. And this becomes a key question in responsible research and innovation. Most of the time, setting scientific agendas are determined by those who have the capacity to finance, those who have the capacity to do the research, and those who have a business or commercial interest. Who has an experience when beyond these three entities, others were also involved in setting the scientific agenda? Can you bring examples, both from your experience or the experience of others, whether you have read something, etc.? Anyone, any ideas, experience, etc., when it wasn't? Okay, Ashish, go ahead.
Yeah, as part of my research on the governance structure in the innovation value chains in pharmaceuticals, I have seen that in the field of antibiotics, there is more and more market oriented structures, which are only firms as participants, whereas other therapeutic areas had more polycentric decision making governance structures. Now, as part of my findings, it's curious that multi-drug resistance is a huge problem in antibiotics. Yet there is no cross conversation between experts who outline it as an important problem and determine the priority of the governance structures. As in, we could have had more polycentric governance structures in antibiotics for this problem solving, but for the lack of this conversation. So I would give that as an example.
Absolutely. This is a great example of how such decisions are made in bubbles, if you will, either policy bubbles or research
Sir, I would
bubbles.
like to add to this.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, Ashish sir's, example, I think there is also contrary evidence of it. So say the WHO.
Contrary to what?
Contrary in the sense like there is an internal dialogue between the experts and the other stakeholders. So for example, WHO is helping eradicate the tuberculosis in India, and by the multi-drug resistant possibilities of eradicating TB, they have implemented DOTS plus program in India, and all those considerations and dialogues are in progress.
Okay, that's great. I don't think.
That is there are certain. I would still kind of agree with what Ashish sir is saying here. Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to also make is that the individual user, his practices and behavior as regards, the use of antibiotics on an indiscriminate basis, right from the doctors who prescribe this medicine to the manufacturers which flood the market with an oversupply of antibiotics. It doesn't really connect with the other actors in the ecosystem, as in the end user still doesn't know the perils of wrong usage or under supervised usage of antibiotics, while it is emerging as a huge problem.
Okay, I agree. The limited knowledge I have, I agree. I think the example is great as to, and obviously pharmaceutical and the medical area is a great case in point, where these ABC actors are mainly in the driver's seat, and key stakeholders are left behind, mostly only involved as consumers or users of the medicines or pharmaceutical solutions that are being developed. This said, I want to close this session. I think we have covered an enormous ground. We've spent 2 hours and 50 minutes together, a lot of time. I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you very much for your extremely valuable contributions, helping me make the points. Thank you very much for participating in the Kahoot. And if you liked it, then we'll do it again. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow. Anup, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very interactive session. And also,
yes, go ahead.
In your last slide, I would like to say something about that where we submit our research proposal to Department of Science and Technology. We have certain research proposals which are already submitted, and first level is screening level is from the subject experts, then the finance people of Department of Science and Technology can take the decision of financing of the research proposal. So there are 2-3 tiers of that financial decision making. So that is the process, and every agencies are also having this kind of people who are final identify the successful project proposal and also discussing the fund. So and in our case of this GIAN course also, so we saw a lot of financial people are involved in decision making. So first level is from the expert committee, then they give to finance people for funding the successful project. So that is the norm. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for very interactive and enlightening lecture sessions. Hope to meet you tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. So goodbye for the day, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.